This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, hotcakes. Welcome to Hot Take, the podcast where we examine the climate crisis and all the ways we're talking and not talking about it. I'm Amy Westervelt.
And I'm Mariana Ease Hegler. In this episode, we are going to dig into the importance of local news and local news reporters to the greater media landscape and ecosystem.
That's right. And our guest is not a local reporter, but he is someone who makes us think he's a local reporter every time he writes a story about a community.
I know. It fooled the fuck out of me.
It's Drew Costley. He is the environment, science, and tech guy at 10. And he's written some of our favorite stories in the last year that kind of hit at this intersection of environmental justice, climate change, and all of the other things happening in the world.
Yeah, exactly. He really has a talent for getting his tentacles into a community and digging deep and not just looking at the surface level. So yeah, when I wanted to talk about local news, I was like, I want to have Drew on to talk about it.
Totally.
And also, Drew is the first Black man we've had on Hot Take. So air horn. That says more about the lack of climate journalists of color, and especially Black climate journalists and Black men climate journalists, than it does about us. But also, hey, look at us. Got one on. So yeah, if you want links to the articles that we talk about here, you should subscribe to our newsletter. If you want some amazing premium content, you can subscribe for just $7 a month.
We also have a free version if $7 a month is too much right now, and we totally get that. There will be more details in the show notes on how to find it, but that gets you at least one feature and our digest of climate stories every week.
1000%. Yeah. All right. Now it is time to talk about climate. Okay, Drew Costley, welcome to Hot Take. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So how did you get into journalism, and specifically into climate journalism?
Yeah, so I've been doing journalism. I'm in my almost mid-30s, and I've been doing journalism since I was in high school. It was actually an English teacher. I was talking a lot in their class, and they suggested that I join the school newspaper since it seemed like I like talking to people, which was like you know the early 2000s version of like Shade. And I joined the school newspaper, and I got to write about sports. That I was really into sports as a teenager and as a kid. And I just have been doing journalism pretty much ever since. I took like a break from 2008 to 2011. And that's around when I got into science journalism. I got bored of sports in my like early to mid 20s, and then and sort of disaffected from journalism. The 2008 recession happened, and journalism was like a miniature version of what's been happening this year with the journalism industry, with local newspapers folding and stuff like that. And I stopped doing journalism, and then the internet got really good around then, like where there was just a lot of information, especially a lot of information on science. And there was something, I was like into science as a kid, and that was just never really fed that much, by like my elders. For whatever reason, and I don't want to like ascribe reasons to it or pathologize it, but like I just around 2008, 9, 10, I just rekindled the love of that I had as a kid of like science and learning about new things all the time, like in like complex concepts, and like translating them to people and like broadening people's understanding as well as my own. And then there were sort of new forms of journalism, like podcasts, like Radio Lab and stuff like that just sort of called me back into the craft. And then I said, okay, well, if I'm going to come back to journalism, I think I'll be a science journalist. And And an environment and climate journalist, I think I had like these latent, I was raised in Northern Virginia where we've been learning about climate and we've been learning about environment in our actual science curriculum since like the early 90s. And like, and like I went and did some reporting for my school newspaper, in the mid 2000s on Katrina recovery. And those were sort of like the sort of latent seeds that led me to actually specifically want to report on like environmental justice and climate. Yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating.
That's super interesting. Also, I love that you got funneled into journalism because you like to talk to people. Because I always people always ask me if I like wrote a lot as a kid, like if I had a journal or whatever, and I'm like, no, I just really liked talking to people.
That's really funny because people always they recommended journalism to me because I like to write.
Yeah.
I tried journalism and I hated it. I was terrible at it. It was like, I have to go talk to these people. This is terrible.
I mean,
I'd rather just.
I will say that like one of the hardest parts of journalism still to this day for me is like cold calling people or like walking up to people that I don't know already and trying to talk to them. I hate it.
Yeah, I hate it too.
Still.
I'm the same. Yeah. I hate that part, like the approach, but I still really love talking to people, especially who don't often get asked about themselves. It's so interesting. I don't know.
Totally.
Anyway, okay, so if you could change one thing, or maybe let's say 1 to 3 things about the way that we talk about climate in the mainstream discourse or in mainstream media, what would it be?
Right. So this is an interesting time to ask a question like that because I think a lot is changing about how we are talking about climate. So if this were like even before June and May in the with the uprisings, if it were before then, I would say I think that we should talk more about like inequities and we should talk more about, cumulative impact and things that have been made sort of bare by the pandemic and by, these uprisings and sort of the right people being in the right place at the right time to talk about environmental justice and environmental racism and climate justice and stuff like that. And so I would say we should talk more about inequities when we talk about climate. I think we should talk more about people. We often talk about loss of property and land and landscape and we talk about wildlife a lot when we talk about climate or we talk about the environment. But I feel like we don't talk about people enough in the lived experiences around climate change because there's already a deep well of lived experiences around what's already happened because of climate change. So those are 2 of the things. And then the third thing I would change is in that this is already changing too, I think, because it's becoming unavoidable how immediate climate change is and that it's already happening. But that I really think the balance of conversations around projections versus things that are already happened needs to be weighed a little more heavily in things that have already happened or things that are happening. Like, I still think we focus on projections too much and they're abstract and people can't connect with them. People don't I don't know what I'm going to eat for lunch tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to eat for dinner. I don't even know what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight. I can't connect with the projection about my appetite tonight, let alone like in 2050, like in 2050, I don't know the hell I'm going to be in 2050. I want to have kids. I don't know if I have kids in 2050. And so it's like we need to stop focusing. I mean, but it's good for science. It's good for understanding. And there, I think, are obviously phases in terms of like how we prepare and what we report on in terms of stuff like that. And we just need to stop. I think we need to, like, especially the larger newspapers and magazines and blah, blah, blah. They need to focus more on shit that's already happening because there's a lot that's already happening right now. And and I think people have more of an emotional and heart connection to it that will like make them more likely to do something.
Yeah. And talking about it in terms of projections really just makes it feel like it's far away and it's, that's a comforting thought, but it's not the truth. So I feel like you kind of touched on this already, but are there any interesting emerging themes that you've noticed in the ways we talk about climate change recently?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, we're talking more about inequities that are based off of identity and class and ability. Yeah, I do think we are talking more about people. Like, there are more. I'm not the only one doing environmental justice reporting, obviously. Like, there's Yesenia Funes and Darna Noor. And even like the larger publications are starting to do environmental justice reporting, which is like ultimately good. I was telling somebody the other day that like I don't report on this stuff just to create entertainment or something. Like I want these things to change. And so these larger publications reporting on this type of stuff, I think might lead to more change. Yeah. And then also I think the rise of, just from like a media standpoint, the rise of like using interactives in multimedia to tell this story. That's probably also something that I think should change and is starting to change. You had like the ProPublica New York Times thing that again focused on projections, focused on the huge big picture with climate migration, but also is a different way of interacting with the issue. So those are interesting themes for sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering, as someone who focuses on environmental justice, do you get pigeonholed as like a, what's that word they use, Amy?
Oh, an activist or like an advocacy journalist or something like that. Yes.
Right. No, I mean, so this is really interesting for me because, like I said, I've been doing journalism since the early 2000s, actually, which is such a long time now. Oh my God. But I was raised in like the traditional journalism sort of school. I'm actually kind of more of an old school journalist. So it's really interesting that I'm coming in environmental justice reporting, like from that angle. So no, at this,
what's the old school?
Okay. So the way that these values would actually collide is like, old school reporting is like try to be objective, try to be neutral, dispassionate, and like strive for that, even if you know that it's impossible. Like the audience knows objectivity is impossible. Objectivity is impossible. Your editors do too, and like you're pretending still like it is, and like in your work product you have to. And that was even like up until there's still newsrooms that practice that sort of ethos when it comes to neutrality, objectivity, and all that. And environmental justice as a concept runs completely counter to that. It assumes that there are different perspectives and identities and experience, or there are different like perspectives and experiences that happen around the environment and how we actually engage with the environment based off of our identities, right? And based off our ability. And so those two things run really counter to each other. Right. So like if I'm going to report on environmental justice, or as like some of the bigger newspapers are starting to hire for like larger for inequities reporters positions or inequalities reporters position, you're like automatically assuming that you as a reporter going in with an understanding of your perspective on the world and like your framework. The ideal pure journalism would be operating with absolutely no framework, which is problematic in itself. But like, so they run counter to each other. So like, no, I haven't like specifically been told that I was an advocacy journalist or an activist yet. I mean, people do question like my reporting based off maybe how I look, or the subject matter and how I'm portraying it, and assume that I'm not operating in good faith. But no, not really. But I could see people doing it, and honestly, like, yeah, there's a difference. Like if they're, if I was reporting on an environmental justice organization and they had like impropriety going on, like I would report on that too. Like it's about, like it's like even like court reporters don't just report on the cops. I mean, they might report on cops and crimes too much in trials, but some of them will report on like judges being like corrupt and shit like that. So like for me, even though I do understand that these inequities exist and that people are doing like things to try to alleviate the issue, like, accountability isn't just a one-way street, like we need to have accountability in these movements too. So I don't see myself as an activist or advocacy person. If you wanted to be quote unquote objective about it, like the science and facts back up the fact that like, Black folks are experiencing like asthma in some parts of the country at like 2 to 4 times the rate as white people. Like that's just facts. So
yeah.
Yeah, I prepared it thinking you were like a through and through Californian, but now I know that you're like originally from the DMV and have lived in California for like 3 years. Yeah, so it's all about weed. But that also works because that is now legal in DC too. I don't know about Virginia, but close enough. So, Drew, what do you call a cup of coffee with CBD in it?
I don't know.
Danka.
Is this lightning round just Mary getting off like puns?
Yes, all of it. What do you call a stoner with 2 spliffs?
I don't know, double fisting? I don't know.
You're close. You're so close. Okay, fine. Double jointed.
Oh Lord. Oh my god. Oh my god. I didn't know that Mary was a dad.
Oh, really? Oh, that shows how often you listen to the show, Drew. I do this every single episode, and Amy has just begrudgingly gotten dragged along.
I'm sorry.
Before we get into the main topic of this week's episode, I have to ask, how are y'all doing as Californians and people who live in California?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think right now the air's clear in Oakland.
Clear here too, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might still be poor air quality in the Central Valley or parts of the Central Valley. I know, like, for example, like when I moved out here, I did not realize how many ecological disasters were happening here. I think on a regular basis, or could happen.
Welcome,
like,
Drew.
California
Welcome.
is literally literally could be an adventure movie. I think when these moments happen, and they've happened literally every year since I've moved out here, like how the pandemic had everybody sheltering in place, like Californians were sheltering in place because of the smoke since at least 2017. Skip 2019. It didn't happen in 2019, gratefully, but in 2017 and 2018, there were at least, I know in 2017 it was like a few days and the smoke wasn't that bad, but in 2018 it was like 5 or 6 days in the Bay Area where you just were locked inside. I don't know. I mean, at this point, I'm like, I'm always, so I come out always a little like rattled and like I think probably like heightened anxiety from it. I'm concerned for folks. Like, it's really ugly out here. A lot of people are suffering, and that is and I might be one of them, depending on, like, I have respiratory issues, and so the smoke is really a no for me. But like I have, relative privilege, class privilege that allows me to have some protection for some of these environmental ills. And other folks don't have it so good. And so I don't know. I'm like rattled. I feel rattled right now. I feel worried about other folks. I'm like worried about the fire season. That was the beginning of the fire season, actually.
I know. That's the part that really freaks me out. Like, the Thomas fire happened in December.
Yeah.
And like,
exactly.
Remind us about the Thomas fire.
That was the one
that was the last biggest fire in California.
Was
right?
that the one that threatened Ellen and them's homes? The one that was in Santa Barbara area?
Yeah, it was
Ellen
like Santa Barbara, Ventura County, and like northern LA. It just was huge. It was the last biggest California fire, and now it's been surpassed by like 2 more this season.
So that's how I'm doing. I'm like rattled, worried.
Yeah.
At the moment, my health is fine. I mean, at least like my physical health is fine. Yeah, just really worried about a lot of folks.
Because when I think about the orange skies that we saw over San Francisco and Oakland, like I've visited there, and you can't spend like 2 seconds in that area without seeing the housing crisis and the gentrification crisis, and just like what happens to people who can't shelter in place because they have no shelter. There's a lot of people like that.
Right.
Yeah. That's been my big fear is that this is the beginning of fire season, and there's just more heat waves predicted. Like, everybody's sort of right now bracing for what could happen on like Monday, Tuesday this coming week, because it's supposed to be high winds and heat waves, and like we're still not on top of the existing fires. And you know what else too I was thinking about was like, you know, there's more and more of these planned outages, which is another thing that I feel like people have just sort of like gotten used to as like a new part of life. And it's like completely fucking bonkers insane that like the utility is like, yeah, you're not going to have power for like who knows how long.
I honestly don't even think it's a part that people have gotten used to. It feels like it's a thing that people just aren't even able to focus on because there's so many other things.
There's so many other things. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I when people talk about everything that's happening out here, they always forget about the PG&E blackouts. So like I went to Berkeley's J School, and then I ended up teaching. I'm teaching there now. I've been teaching there. This is my second year teaching there since I graduated. And like in the last class, I've thought about their last semester of school, because there's so much packed into it that was not school related, that was outside of school. And then I think about their last year as a total, and I'm like, wow, they had the pandemic. They had, at the end, they had these racial uprisings, and just really colored their experience. And then I think about the fact that in the fall they had PG&E shutouts, but we always forget about that. Like in the past year, like there would be these rolling blackouts.
They give you some amount of heads up, but it's not that much. And, you know, if you have like a medical condition that requires a device that plugs in, for example, you know, I'm just like, oh God, what are people doing?
Yeah.
And then that on top of the pandemic and everything else is just...
What happens when you eat marijuana?
Depends on how you've processed it.
You gotta think like a pun. You gotta think like a pun.
You digest. We digest weed.
No. You get a pot belly, Drew.
That's so dumb. That's so dumb.
It's actually true. That is also true, though. Yeah,
that is
also,
true.
Yeah, it works.
Well, it can be true. It's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna come back to the wildfires in like more detail. But the main reason we wanted to have you on the show, Drew, was because we wanted to talk about the death of local news. And we thought you'd be a great person to have on the show because you're not a local news reporter. You report all over the country, but you do it in a way that like I was confused. Like I didn't know where you lived. I was like, oh, clearly he lives in New Orleans. No, he lives in Ohio. No, where is this dude? Like Carmen Sandiego? Like where is he?
Nice. That's a high compliment as like somebody who
It's a high compliment.
grew up idealizing Carmen Sandiego and like Where's Waldo?
Wait, really?
I'm like, I loved Carmen Sandiego and Where's Waldo, so I'm like, I'm feeling this. Thank you.
That's awesome. No, but like your stories were so deeply reported in these very disparate places that I just assumed like only a local reporter could do that. So I mean, that was just something that really stuck out to me. But another, we're concerned about the fall of local journalism because it is really problematic for a million reasons. So just like lay out the landscape. Since the fall of 2018, communities have had their newspapers in 2004 now have no original reporting whatsoever in print or digitally has grown to 1,800 from 1,300. News deserts are becoming more and more common, especially in Black communities, especially in brown communities, and especially in rural communities. I want to read from this piece that came out in The Atlantic in 2019 called Local News is Dying and Americans Have No Idea. The newspaper industry has been in tailspin since internet companies ate the $5 billion in classified advertising they'd been raking in, and social media became an alternative entry point to the day's news. Worse, the solution that saved the New York Times, high-margin digital subscriptions, has not yet proved itself for smaller papers. Just 14% of Pew's survey respondents said they had paid for local news in some way in the past year. 49% of the people who didn't pay cited the widespread availability of free content as their reason why, according to Pew. Local radio, a few stations accepted, has been cannibalized by digital on-demand offerings. Free subscription alternative news weeklies, which often provided a substantial counterbalance to establishment papers but never had a paying subscriber base to rely on, started losing business to Craigslist decades ago and never really recovered. Many have received their eulogies. Others are attenuated and anemic. And what's happening to TV news is even scarier.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Jon Stewart had a segment about how they've been bought up by this company called Sinclair Broadcasting Group, which is like hella right wing.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to use that word, Amy?
Yes, it's fine. We'll allow it. We'll allow it.
Okay. Really right wing and really scary. Like I remember in 2017, they had them read all this creepy statement about like, fake news. Remember this?
Yes, I do remember this. It was so gross. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're like steady buying up local news stations and taking them over.
It's bad. It's bad news. Yeah. Bad news. Yeah. That's a pun.
It's fine. It's fine, Amy. I'll let you have it. She hated on the dad jokes, and now she wants to get on the train and stuff.
It's true.
You gotta work harder.
Trying to write them. Yeah.
But no, Drew, it sounds like your whole roots are in, local journalism, and yeah. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure. I think so. Even the career path of a journalist has been radically altered by not just this year, but really the last, I would say even since the early 80s is what I've learned from like my elders in the industry around like when this sort of consolidation and gutting and buyouts and layoffs started. And really it was to improve the bottom line at the time of these companies that were privately held. And so they didn't have to report like their earnings and things like that. So they would just like basically lie and say that they were in more dire straits financially in the 80s and 90s than they actually were, just so that they could improve their profits. That's like literally what happened with the Baltimore Sun. And so this issue goes back really far, and it has been it's been sort of the specter of this this actually happening has been sort of a backdrop of like probably my whole career as a journalist. The old career path for TV news, for radio, and for newspapers was to work in smaller markets and to work your way up. And those smaller markets have just been the ones that have been completely decimated by this sort of the demise of local news. So I was planning on like maybe working in a small market, mid-major market, and then working up to being able to move back home or something, right? And work for the Post or work for something like a larger publication. But those rungs of the ladder have been sort of like eliminated. Yeah. And so I ran the school newspaper at Howard. That was a local community. And we also did like local reporting in DC too, in the area where Howard was. And then for our metro section. And then I worked in Northern Virginia at a small weekly newspaper, like a free weekly called the Falls Church News Press. And that was only local reporting there. So yeah, that's like my roots, my background, and really like this understanding of the importance of it, how like communities become informed, how they share information, how they learn information. It's been really important. The sort of gutting of local news has been, just supremely detrimental. They used to have like a lot of local papers would have two reporters covering the courts, right? Somebody would take an AM shift and they would come and write in the PM on what happened in the AM, and then there'd be a PM reporter who would report in the PM, and then in the AM they would file a story about what happened the day before. And that hasn't existed since in a lot of local newspapers since the 90s, right? And that's like 30 years ago. So like this erosion in local news isn't really new. It has had these inflection points, like in 2008 was in 2009 was an inflection point when a lot of publications, collapsed or had huge layoffs and buyouts. And then this year has just been, it's been brutal. It's been really brutal to see. And it's not just local news at this point. It's like huge magazines, online publications. A lot of people are laying folks off. And the net result is that there's less information going into the community. And so the community is less informed about things that are happening in their own community. So it's almost like their consent and their agreements are sort of lessened because they're coming into it with less information, so they're less well informed. It's not really like people can't make consensual decisions without information, right? So
right.
So that's
there's no such thing as there's no such thing as uninformed consent.
Right. Exactly.
How do fish get stoned?
Through their gills. I'm like so bad right now at puns. I don't know why. Probably because I have a regular coffee instead of a red eye.
Or a danka.
I don't know. Tell me.
Amy, you want to help him? How do fish get stoned?
I don't know. I'm bad at these too.
From seaweed.
Oh,
it was right there.
All right. We should have known.
Through their Gil Scott heroines.
Oh no, that's not stoned. That's different.
Since weed is a gateway drug.
Oh, I see.
What does this mean for climate? Because I know, like, I've spent a lot of time looking at sort of the last 100 years of news and PR and all that stuff. And it's like, in a lot of ways, the whole fossil fuel industry's kind of PR apparatus was built in response to investigative journalism. And they've spent just a ton of time and money and resources in general on trying to neutralize the power of that information, So anyway, I'm going to read this excerpt from a story that ran in the Columbia Journalism Review a while back about sort of what happens in especially frontline oil and gas communities when there's no paper left. It's called A Pipeline Runs Through Southern News Deserts. And this was by Lindsay Gilpin. All 3 states crossed by the Atlantic Coast Pipeline have a dearth of local newspapers, according to the UNC report. West Virginia has 3 counties without a newspaper. Virginia has 7. And about half of the 25 counties along the Atlantic Coast Pipeline route, print news comprises a single weekly paper. Several weekly or daily papers cover more than one county. The counties along the route are some of the most rural and economically depressed parts of the U.S. in a region that is historically reliant on extractive fossil fuels. In North Carolina, 7 of the 8 counties the proposed pipeline would run through are predominantly black. These places lack consistent, informative local coverage of energy, justice, and the environment because of the declining number and resources of print news outlets, shifting the balance of news sources toward expanding corporate media monopolies. The areas are also overlooked by national media, which mostly parachute in to cover major updates or catastrophes, or if they need a tie-in to President Trump's policies. A dynamic that can perpetuate inaccurate stereotypes about these places. Yes, all of that. It's so problematic. It's really problematic.
I am part of the problem because I covered this.
Damn you, Drew. No,
we covered this. I mean, there's like, that's the thing is like, I covered the Atlantic Coast Pipeline when they announced that project was shuttering, when they closed that project. And that was it, you know, that's an example of like, I mean, 1-0 is national media, you know. Yeah. And I mean, I didn't parachute in just because it was COVID times, but I mean, I digitally parachuted in. I had a digital parachute. It's called my cell phone. And yeah, I know, dude. Yes, this is the problem. I also am a journalism educator, and I taught. We have a summer course. Like I said before, I'm a journalism educator, and we had this summer course at Cal on environmental reporting, and we had like 30 students or so this time around, and I was just like, hey guys, we need you. If you have genuine interest in this, we really need you, because there's so much shit going on in these places. Like these places can be staffed with people who have the skills to do the type of information gathering and dissemination that is needed right now in these communities. Even like thinking about when I reported on the ACP, thinking about the lack of network between the people who were in the coalition, like actual, like they knew of each other, but they weren't like connected. And I wonder if I'm the first reporter that's connected all of them, you know, like in a story or something like that. And I'm probably not. That's probably, again, my dumb ego. But like, I'm just thinking about I'm just thinking about how little reporting there is like in these places. Like another example is Richmond, California. Out here, there's, you know, there were two small community newspapers in Richmond that closed. The Richmond Post. Well, no, Richmond Post I think is still going. It's a black paper. And then there's this other Richmond. I can't remember the name. That one shuttered, and there wasn't a paper in Richmond. Chevron actually created its own newspaper.
I was just gonna say, but there's still the Chevron paper in Richmond.
Yeah, they created.
I need more information.
So they literally filled a vacuum. Like there was a news desert in Richmond, and they Chevron filled it with the Richmond Standard, and it's a newspaper that is sponsored by Chevron, and it's
run by a PR firm that is dirty as hell, and just it's so gross.
Holy shit! I did not know anything about this. They're really going there with the company town shit, aren't they?
They really are. Yeah.
Right. Well, this is nothing new, right? Like this isn't anything new, you know. And I mean, like, I think it's important to be able to be extremely passionate and dispassionate. And if you think about like how communities build themselves, like company town isn't really necessarily a bad thing. Like it's like people go find resources and then they create community around those resources. That's like super old school. But
and the company like should be supporting things in the community,
or at least like consensual agreement around like how to like share those resources and like how to distribute them. But the problem, what makes it problematic is like the fact that like they're polluting the shit out of Richmond, and they're polluting they're polluting communities of color and poor communities there, and that same information isn't getting out, you know, on a regular basis. I mean, I cover Richmond too. I cover Richmond regularly. A lot of my stories originate in the Bay Area. If you actually go look at my sourcing, like probably the majority of them are in the Bay, because there's a lot of stuff going on here, and two, is where I'm at. So, so like, you know, that's Richmond is another example of this. And the Chevron plant there is polluting. It's put tens of thousands of people in danger in 2012 with the Chevron fire.
I think it was like 80,000 people went to the hospital for like various things related to that.
But I want to push on this idea, Drew. You're part of the problem for quote swooping in, because
I'm just kidding.
Because I don't think you are. Because,
I was just kidding.
Well, I do think it's something to be interrogated though, because
I'm the part of other problems, not that one.
But I do want to make clear that like what we're saying here is not that national reporters shouldn't cover local issues too, but that you need the local reporters there, one, for the national reporters to like come in and like get the lay of the land and talk to, and like local reporters are just going to know.
That needs to be worked out better too, though, because what happened, like I firmly believe that like there just needs to be better actual collaboration between national outlets and local outlets or local reporters. And the way it's been done in the past is that national outlets basically swoop in and act like they're doing you this big fucking favor when really they're just extracting shit from you.
Exactly. But
yeah,
that's a really good lead into a piece that I wanted to read from in the Atlantic called An Ode to the Local Newspaper. Local reporters don't get to leave the scene of the tragedy. It's where they live. What they do matters to their community, and local journalists know it in their bones. It's what makes their work worth doing. Local journalists and their newspapers play a special role. They help define a community's character and identity. Coverage in their pages confers status, recognition. Absence from their pages also sends a painful message that the lives of some people don't matter. And while their front pages may be what people remember most, the value of what's called agate type, the small type that lists the times of runners in a race or winners in a contest at a local fair, or the list of all the graduates of a high school, shouldn't be underestimated.
Wow, that's the first time that I've seen the word agate since I was an intern at USA Today in 2007. That just makes me feel so. That's such a nerd journalism nerd word.
It is a very big nerd word. Yes.
Well, tell me what it means, because
agate type is just like the little, like, if you go to the sports page and you see just like the stats. Basically, it's basically stats.
Mm-hmm. When something big is happening, like you needed national reporters to swoop in for Hurricane Katrina, for example, right? Because that is how you make it a big enough of a story that people are aware of it, that you can draw connections to things that are happening on the other side of the country. But they could not have told that story well without the local journalists, and a lot of them didn't talk to the local journalists and covered it very, very poorly, right? Like the people who covered Katrina the best were the people at the Times-Picayune and other local outlets, right? So like you're saying, like, it's an ecosystem and we need all parts of it in order to function properly as the fourth estate.
Right. I think the Times-Picayune was, like, when Katrina happened, Times-Picayune was, like, it was a couple of years before the Times bought the Times-Picayune, like, and it became part of the New York Times Corporation. And I think a lot of these, I did not know that happened. And so I think, and I think they might have sold them off since then, too, and then they closed, and now they're part of the Advocate. But, like, but when 2008 hit, a lot of the larger media companies were trying to create their own. They were trying to create the ecosystem as sort of like a ground up, like where they have the big national publication, like the New York Times has, or USA Today with USA Today, and then they had the smaller publications, and then they were trying to create that ecosystem in their own way. But I think that has its own problems too, right? But the thing is sometimes the ecosystem doesn't exist. Like when some of these stories that I've worked on in the past year of working for 1-0, it's been like, I'm calling, and I'm the first person that's called them in 5 years about this thing. Wow. It's like, why? Yeah. Why? Mm-hmm. And then I go back and I look, and there's been some iterative reporting, by local publications as much as possible. But then there's other developments that happen that aren't reported on just because it's a capacity issue, in some of these communities. And in some of them, it's just that no one's called them, and no one's called them in like 10 years about an issue that's going on in their community, and continues to for example, in Detroit, they have the Marathon Refinery, and has not gone away in Southwest Detroit. And I come along and I'm like, I talk to people and they're like, no one's called us since what's his name, homie from Jay Inslee, and so since Jay Inslee came in town, no one's called us since then.
Right. Yes, exactly.
So
exactly. Like the immediate assumption is that, the media just doesn't care about this story, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, it's really more of a capacity. I mean, sometimes, yes, that's true. But I just think the capacity issue is such a big problem.
Well, also what happens, I think, a lot in the internet is that, like, your perspective is so broad. Like, I think a lot of people have a lot of breadth in the internet. Like, a lot of individual people have breadth, but they don't have depth. And I'm not talking about media. I'm talking about critics of the media. And a lot of times people will be coming to an issue for themselves for the first or second time. And actually they'll be like, Like, our favorite thing in the media is when someone's like, why don't you guys cover this? And you could just throw them a link of the last story you wrote on it. When they weren't paying attention.
Right, exactly.
And so that happens a lot too, but yeah.
Yeah. Wanted to talk about that really, I think, encapsulates this need for local news in climate is the California wildfires story. And I think that really gets into knowing a community, and not just California at this point, right? Like it's Oregon, I mean, Washington. I think some of them are even in Canada at this point.
Yep.
It's just like the western half of the continent being on fire.
Yeah. I mean, there are actually way more evacuations in Oregon, but I feel like it got talked about a lot less than California.
Yeah. The air pollution was worse for longer.
Yeah. And in Oregon, the prisons actually got evacuated, which I've been searching, and I still haven't found an instance of prisons being evacuated in California.
It's so gross.
But yeah, we wanted to get you to read from a piece that you wrote, Drew. California is on fire and choking out its most vulnerable. And you wrote it August 27th.
That was the case in 2017, which was a historic fire season, the most destructive on record at the time. The 2018 fire season was also historic. It supplanted 2017's as the most destructive and also became the most deadly on record. That year, Mask Oakland distributed over 85,000 masks throughout the Bay Area, according to the group's website. Then 2019 was relatively mild in terms of wildfires, according to the California State Fire Agency, CAL FIRE. But this is 2020, and a variety of ecological crises that climate scientists and environmentalists have warned us about for decades are intersecting and adding up. The pandemic is hitting on top of air pollution, hazardous waste, hurricanes, flooding, and wildfires. In California, wildfire season has only just begun, and the state is already on track to break the 2018 record for acres burned, over 1.6 million as a publication, which is like, I think, over
blown past that by now.
I think it's like over 3 million the last time I checked.
Wow.
It is.
The wildfires burning throughout California have spread smoke throughout the West, creating unhealthy air quality in places like Idaho and Colorado. And at this point, it has reached all the way out to the East Coast. It's adding to the poor air quality in poor communities and communities of color, the latter of which disproportionately bear the brunt of air pollution created by white Americans. And exposure to wildfire smoke, like exposure to tear gas, can trigger physiological responses that can spread deadly diseases. Redwoods, who's a trans disability activist, says a lot of the clientele they distribute masks to already have heart and lung problems that are linked to the types of pollution that are ubiquitous in their communities, like car and diesel truck emissions or water contamination from industrial sites. So so I think like this year has been a lot of stories of like the pandemic plus this, and this isn't any different. But I actually connected with Quinn Jasmine Redwoods, the trans disability activist, back in 2017 during the North Bay wildfires, when I was working for a local publication, a hyper-local newspaper called Oakland North, that despite its geographic designation covers like all of Oakland, and it runs out of the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, I mean, I think like that was the big question, you know. And I woke up, I remember in 2017 we didn't have AC in my place, and so we had the windows open the night that the North Bay fires like blew up in 2017, and so the smoke, it was all in our room when we woke up, and I was just like panicking, and then I was like, and once we like closed the windows and I like calmed down, I was like, wait, what's up with the homeless folks, yo? Like, what's gonna happen to them? And so there were other people thinking about that, like activists and a few other journalists, but I think that actually now that I'm thinking about it, the only publications that covered efforts to help the homeless community in the wildfires in 2017 were hyper-local ones. So there was Oakland North, the one that I reported on. I was reporting for. There's this publication called Hoodline that covers Oakland and San Francisco, and it's a hyper-local publication. And I think there may have been one more, but maybe not. I think there might have been just us two at the time. And so, yeah, it just highlights the importance of like our experiences as people are local, right? Like, like I'm not like, I don't wake up in the morning and think about like what's happening in every single like bed in America. I think about what's happening in my bed, like. Am I actually awake? Am I on the bed? And our physical environments are very can be very local or tend to be. And so like environmental reporting, I think it makes the most sense. Like thinking about our physical environments, like should also be very local. And it's not. And the results is all these people's health. Like the result is 2020. The result is the pandemic. The result is Black, Latinx, and Indigenous folks dying of COVID at 2 to 4 times the rate of white people. I think that stat has changed over time as levels have evened out. I think it's actually closer to like 2 to 2.5 times for Indigenous and Black folks. But that's the result of local reporting. Yeah, it's still twice the times. And so that's the result of no local reporting on what the hell's happening with the air quality in West Oakland, or what's happening with the air quality in Richmond, or what's happening with the water quality in Navajo Nation. Like there's no local reporting on that, and those things will get fixed. But also we're like not reporting on the environmental conditions that are happening before the effects of climate change take place. And so people are just and so 200,000 people drop dead. Most of it, and disproportionately, they're Black and Latinx and Indigenous. Yeah. And white folks are like, why did that happen?
Yeah.
And POC and BIPOC and elders in these communities have said, we've been fucking telling you this for 40 years.
Yeah.
That's what
it reminds me. Yeah, it reminds me of when we when the pandemic was first kicking off in the United States, and we had Samantha Montano, our favorite disasterologist, on the show, and we were like, we're scared, we don't know what to do, and we were like, so what's your advice for people? And she's like, pay attention to your local news. And in the back of my head, I'm like, what if you ain't got none though? You know what I mean? Like when shit is real, right? There's a hurricane barreling on you, a wildfire. Like you need to know what moves to make right now, right? And nobody at the New York Times is going to be able to tell you that, right? Like you got to be able to rely on your local news. And it also kind of reminds me of at the beginning of the protests in late May, early June, I live in New York. I need to know what is happening. Right? Like, are the police being crazy outside? Like, if I walk outside, am I going to get hit with a rubber bullet? What's happening? And I couldn't know that by reading the New York Times because they weren't covering it properly. And also they don't really see themselves as a local newspaper that much. Right. So I had to look at Twitter.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing is when we talk about local news, let's be real. Like the newspaper is pretty much a white Anglo-Saxon invention, right? When we talk about local news, we should talk about local news and information, right? Because our grandmas are not on Twitter. If both my grandmas are dead, but if our elders are not on Twitter, and somehow they keep getting information to each other about what the hell's going on in their communities. Somehow, I think the fact that they live on they go and sit out on their porches and talk to each other every day, is probably a good reason, or something like that. And then also in the digital era with younger folks, Twitter is a great source of information. Also, TikTok's a great source of information. I mean, especially with younger folks, especially media, they're I'm so impressed, and they make my job easier, is these younger climate and environmental justice activists that are hella media savvy. Yeah. I'm just great. You're media savvy, give me some quotes, you know the deal. And there's one person I remember giving updates from Mauna Kea last year. There was one young person, and it's just that, that's not a newspaper, but that's information, that's valuable. So.
And do you feel, Drew, there's been a little bit of a shifting around sourcing rules as far as that goes too? I feel like more people are actually finding those activists and talking to them because of digital and social tools now than maybe they would have like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's probably easier for some people who normally wouldn't be near those sources.
Yeah.
To have access to them or to know that they exist. I think that there are like younger folks who look at activists differently and value their work differently, so they report on them differently, and so they value them as sources differently. So for me, like, and actually, that's actually as a result of like, you could probably make a case for like calling like Aaron Brockovich like the first citizen scientist or something like that, or like somebody who did it before. Like, some of these people actually are experts like in the shit that's going on because they've had to develop expertise, over time, even if they don't have a PhD to their name. I just think that younger folks value the work of activism differently, I think. Yeah. And so younger journalists prioritize it differently in their work. I know I do. I know I like value, they're the people who usually like have a lot of information and like, they might, they obviously have a very obvious bias that might color their tactics or strategy or how they view themselves in their work and like what should be done.
So do CEOs and so
exactly.
Yeah, but I feel like
bias 100%.
Yeah, bias is just a shitty word for perspective.
Why did the stoner plant Cheerios in the ground?
Because they're bad. They're bad munchies.
He thought they were bagel seeds.
Why? That is like a full dad joke.
Okay, we're almost to the end. Why did the stoner cross the street?
Because there's a dispensary on the other side.
Boom! Look at it!
Yes, well done.
I'm interested, how do y'all think the West Coast media sources did with covering the wildfires recently?
The actual like West Coast based ones? I mean, I thought the LA Times did a fucking great job. But everybody was like, "Oh, none of the big papers are covering fire." I'm like, yes, you mean like none of the East Coast papers, but like the LA Times is pretty on it.
Well, that's the thing.
And the San Francisco Chronicle.
But that's also people's understanding of the media is been colored by how consolidated and nationalized it's become over the past 40 to 50 years. Because when they think of the media, they don't think about their local news sources or whether or not they even have one. They think about MSNBC, CNN, Fox, New York Times, Washington Post. When they say that, that's what they're saying. They're not saying they may be saying their local news broadcast, like their local TV news broadcast, but they're not talking about their local papers, their radio broadcast.
But I would also say that the LA Times is a major fucking paper. And so it's like the San Francisco Chronicle. So like, I don't even, I saw a lot of people who worked at the LA Times like super pissed on Twitter being like, hey, right here, we're covering it, right? I also want to give like a quick shout out to the LA Times because they're one of the very few, or the only major paper I've seen with a climate section that is easily accessible from its main page. Like it's on the very top of the masthead.
Also, just like shout out to them for hiring Sammy Roth, who was a fucking awesome local reporter out in like the Palm Springs desert area forever. I used to read that guy's stuff all the time because he was so good on a lot of the big energy projects that were happening out in the desert. And like, I feel like that paper has done a pretty good job of sort of finding local talent in other places and like bringing them on in a way that lets them still report on those places too, So Sammy's
great. And I think I think that the Times and the Chronicle both at this point have good infrastructures in place for reporting on wildfires. I know I was at so SF Gate is a subsidiary of the Chronicle, and so I was at the Chronicle during 2017 and 2018 and saw them build their infrastructure for like tracking wildfires and things like that. And they have they're doing I think as good of a job as they can, and it's a pretty good one. And also like Yeah, they these are newspapers who are dealing with like very diminished staffs. And now we're seeing that like having one wildfire reporter might not be enough. You have a wildfire reporter,
right?
And it might not be enough. You might need 2 wildfire reporters.
You might need an inferno desk.
Right, exactly. You might need a wildfire desk, or something like that. Just because, like, if you think about the lightning complex fire that happened out here in the Bay, it was like the East Bay, but it was in multiple cities. And then there was like another lightning complex fire that was in the South Bay. And then there was one in the North Bay. And it's like, so you see, and like, you only have one reporter to cover these 3 wildfires that are happening all at the same time. It's like these papers are pulling reporters off of other desks to cover these wildfires. So it's like, so I would say they're likely overwhelmed, and we probably need more resources. I wouldn't say in like big cities like LA and the Bay, but more so like in the mid-sized cities in California, or like in the Central Valley, Fresno area. They have the Fresno Bee, but there's like a lot of communities up and down the Central Valley that like just don't have enough reporting.
What it seems like we're really talking about here is East Coast media bias, which I know Amy has a million thoughts on. So I'm just going to let her go.
Oh, man. Well, I was just, I complain about the East Coast media thing a lot,
not a lot.
But I do feel like, as the fires got bigger and bigger, kind of everyone's covering it. There was this huge response to this op-ed that Charlie Warzel wrote in the New York Times that was basically, I didn't really understand until I moved west. And I was like, geez, even when one of these, I don't know, big boy papers is like doing a story on this stuff, it's in this way that's sort of...
It still centers the East.
Yeah, I'm like, why do we need to hear from like the New York media guy who, moved to Montana 2 years ago and now understands fire?
How do you not understand fire though? Like, I don't understand that at all.
I don't know.
No, a lot of people, I didn't get it. Like, fire is actually very complex, one.
Yes.
And 2, I didn't understand that, like, as simple as it sounds, I did not understand that, like, a fire in, like, near Sacramento, like with the Paradise Fire in 2018, could, like, completely engulf the region I live in, which is, like, driving-wise, it's, I think, like, about 2 hours away.
Yeah,
in smoke for days, and that it would linger. I did not get that. I'm sorry.
That's the part. I actually really think that's the part that people don't get is actually not the fire part. It's the smoke part and the fact that it lasts for so long. Because sometimes people will say like, oh, but hurricane recovery lasts a long time. And then I'll tell them that like,
any recovery lasts a long time.
Yeah, exactly. But then I'll say like, oh, that we've had smoke for 6 weeks, and they're like, what?
Right. I don't know. I think this is where, like, you can tell I'm country. Like, fire scares the shit out of me, right? Like, I know that, like, back home people, like, burn their garbage.
Yeah.
Right.
And that can easily turn into a fire. But, like, Mississippi's, like, swampy. It's, like, not nearly as dry as California, right? So, like, I'm scared of the fire catching, but that doesn't really happen back home. But I look at California, especially the first time I went to California, and I'm just looking around seeing, like, matchsticks in the woods. The whole time I'm like, this is very precarious.
Well, let me just read you the intro of this story that I saw get like shared over and over again. Like a bunch of people were like, oh my God, this is so great. I finally get it now. And I was like, really? If you've never experienced a fire season before, it's hard to explain the emotional, physical, and sensory effects of having the world immolate before your eyes. I spent decades with only a passing knowledge of wildfires. I'd read about smoke jumpers and fire seasons, sure. I'd seen the news videos of planes and helicopters dumping water on burning hillsides. I have distinct memories of images of the California countryside at night with a raging fire threatening a neighborhood development and reports of evacuations and deaths. It seemed awful and cruel and arbitrary, but also like something happening in a distant part of the world. I empathized, but I didn't understand. Then I moved west. And it goes on from there. But actually, the one thing that I think is is kind of dangerous about this kind of general lack of understanding of fire in a lot of newsrooms is kind of like what you were talking about, Drew, that like you were like, yeah, I didn't realize about the smoke, and fire is complicated. And I feel like what we're seeing now is a rash of these kind of climate denial dudes being like, oh no, you guys are misunderstanding. It's all about forest management, which is really easy to spread because a lot of people don't know enough to push back on that and say, yeah, it's forest management and climate change and bad development policies, like those things can all be a problem together.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. Like, I'd say like, yeah, I would say like it can definitely like contribute to this issue of oversimplification and flattening a problem.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's very weird to see this forest management thing turn into a climate denial cudgel, because it was like
so weird.
Just like 2 years ago, like land management and controlled burns was like kind of at the edge of EJ or something. It was like things that like only people like in EJ circles talked about, really, and like really maybe even like indigenous folks, and like people who are also other people who are concerned with land management. But like, and so now it's like a mainstream topic of discussion, like controlled burns, and also is being used as this like cudgel for climate deniers. It's so weird.
Yeah. It is really, really, really weird. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah.
So.
But I think like, yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I'm with Charlie. I didn't get it. But shit. But I mean,
that's all right.
That's the thing is like, that's the thing is like they could also, and I'm sure the New York Times is such a huge operation. I'm sure that they've like had people talking about this fire season who haven't just moved to the West and been here for a while. But yeah, I mean, this framing of it. I mean, I think this framing is actually like very, it's like kind of a classic journalism framing where it's like you want to try to put the reader, you want to put yourself in the reader's shoes and then put the reader in your shoes, like where it's like, I didn't know about this thing that you also didn't know about, and now we're both learning about it together. Aha! Like it's sort of I think the framing.
Yeah.
But I also, have my gripes with East Coast media bias as a Mississippian because, I mean, Hurricane Laura just straight up devastated Louisiana and Texas. And Hurricane Sally did the same thing, and you heard very little about either one of them, really.
Yes.
I mean, we heard about Laura as like this meteorological marvel before she made landfall, but then, the aftermath really hasn't been talked about that much. And same thing with Sally, but even worse because I think Sally was like she was big, but she was not very strong before she made landfall. And then she like rapidly intensified. My friend Anna Jane Joyner lives down there and had to evacuate in the middle of the night because she intensified so fast that nobody knew to evacuate. And I have been searching for stories about what that looked like, how it happened. And I've just been like, not been able to find very much about it. It's really like scary that that's just let go of. And I'm used to this, right? Like my mama still lives down there and a lot of my family lives in Birmingham, and like their weather is not my news, but my weather is their news. Right. So like, I don't always know what's happening to them, which, I know I should call my mama more often. Shut up.
I mean, I think like what like I think you should call your mom more, Mary, and also I think you end up finding like this happens to me a lot too, like when I'm reporting stuff, like especially stuff that happened a while ago, like when I was reporting on like climate resiliency in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and Harvey. There was stuff about Katrina, even like things even about New Orleans, which was the biggest city that was reported on, where most of the focus was. There were things missing. There were things that had to dig, like facts about, just like simple facts in terms of verifying them. that you would have to dig to find like the hard copy of something that would prove something, not like a print copy, but like just a hard digital copy, in like a PDF or something, and like so I feel that like it's like wait, what happened between this date and this date?
Yes.
That led to the latter date, being the outcome, and then you just have to dig because there weren't a lot of local news sources even then to report on that stuff.
The other thing I think about, the story just came out today in the LA Times where they basically read themselves for filth, where they, like, if you don't know what that phrase means, it basically means like they told on themselves about their really shitty history with reporting on race and being incredibly biased toward police. And it's just like a really comprehensive accounting of all the times they fucked up, apologizing for it and talking about what they're going to do differently in the future. It came out today. I've read half of it. It's really, I think so far, very good. And Amy, what was your first reaction to that?
I can't imagine the New York Times ever doing this. Like, ever.
That's literally what you texted me back when I sent you.
Yeah. Yes.
But I don't know. I wonder what that says about like the West Coast versus the East Coast, because I associate police brutality a lot, or at least the conversation about police brutality with the West Coast because of
Rodney King and like
Rodney, yeah, and NWA and Ice-T, right? Like I think of like in the Black Panthers, right? Like they forced this issue into people's psyche, the Black community in the West Coast, I should say, because people weren't talking about it. And as much as like the LA Times and the media out there would be like, no, that's not true. It's gangs, it's violence in these communities. They're like, no, they legit drove a tank through my front fucking door.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the videotaping of the Rodney King beating.
Yeah,
you can draw like some really strong through lines to the videos of police brutality that are coming out now, because like before Rodney King, people were like, yeah, I don't believe you.
Right.
And then
that was the first viral video of police brutality. I mean, it's sad that was more than 20 years ago, and we're still seeing these fucking videos all the time. But yeah, and it brings back to mind a piece that you wrote a little while ago, Drew, that we've talked about on this show before, but just like you talked about why defunding the police is an environmental justice issue. And you brought up something that I didn't see anybody else talking about, which was the type of pollution that police generate.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how did you think of that angle?
I thought of that angle because environmental justice activists have been talking about abolishing the police or police reform, as part of environmental, policy so I have to like completely thank like elders in that movement for that, and people who are like younger folks too who are in the environmental justice movement, because really they're the ones that when I would my understanding of environmental justice was still very like mainstream and thinking about like environmental impacts of like pollution or climate change. And a lot of these organizations, even like, we think about like climate justice organizations like Sunrise Movement, talk about abolishing the police and, and maybe that's more so since June, but since the uprisings, but
I think so.
Yeah.
But I still think that there are other EJ, like more EJ organizations like We Act in New York and stuff like that, and other environmental justice and in the Asian Pacific Environmental Network and Communities for Better Environment out here, and have been talking about police reform at least, or or prison reform at least, as part of environmental justice, right? And so that's where the framing came from. And so I was just thinking about it, and I was like, well, and then I was thinking about the parts of environmental justice that concern themselves with the built environment, and like human creations that are part of our environment that we have to think about. Like when we think about heat islands, we think about all the concrete that humans have put on the ground that have created these conditions, right? And so then I'm thinking, okay, well, humans also thought about putting police presence in, or really putting police in certain communities and not others, right? And they create part of the environment by being there. Like some people walk out of their house and they see a cop car and others don't. And that means something, It's that simple.
Right.
Just like some people walk out of their house and they inhale air pollution and others don't. Right. And so that was sort of how it grew out. And then I've lived in communities with high police presence before. And I was just thinking about the different types of pollution, of what's a little bit more traditional pollution that they create that we would consider traditional pollution. And then I have to shout out my instructor from the Berkeley J School, James Fahn, who whenever he gives a spiel about the different types of pollution, he always calls out noise pollution at the end, and no one realizes. He says, and there's this other type of pollution that nobody ever considers. And I want you to try to guess what it is. I'm just going to be silent. And then he's just silent. He's like, and then no one gets it. He's like, noise pollution. He's like, because it's silent here. And it's like, especially because the journalism school is like in like the more like affluent part of Berkeley, on the campus. And so it's quieter there. And so I was thinking about like noise pollution that's created in like I where I live, like near downtown Oakland, there's still lots of like sirens and cop cars and stuff like that. And then I've lived in DC in like crack districts where they would have floodlights on my street, like so in huge floodlights, literally lighting up the whole block, to where you think that you don't know what type of like you could wake up and look outside your window and not realize that it's like still the evening because it's so bright on your block.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about those things, and so I just so that's sort of how those parts of the article made it in. But just thinking about the police presence as part of the built environment and its impact on communities of color.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we've mentioned this throughout the episode, but I actually think it's pretty important. Like, you are a man of color.
Yeah, I'm black. I'm a black dude.
Right. He's a black dude. First, and it's important to, like, the black gaze is important for these types of stories. Like, you're going to see things, you're going to think about things that aren't there. Like, no secret that I'm also black, and like that informs the way that I think about things, like the sorts of perspective that I bring to it. Like Amy is Mexican and she thinks about that sort of thing too. So
and white. Don't forget, I've got a Karen mom. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that explains the fucking mayonnaise.
I know.
Wow.
I know.
I also have white ancestors.
I have white ancestors
then
too.
How did you not get the mayonnaise gene?
I have self-respect. So, 5 guys walked into a Burger King. They were in and out.
Oh, wow. That was good. That was good. Good to bring us back to dad jokes. That's good.
Drew ate it. It really was a treat to have you on the show.
Yes, thank you, Drew.
Yeah, we could talk to you forever and ever.
Yes,
awesome. Yeah, no, this is great. I'm having fun. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you so much to Drew Costley for joining us on the show today. You can and should follow him on Twitter at Drew Costley, and that last name is Costley. And follow his reporting over at 10 on Medium.
Yep. You can also follow us on Twitter at Real Hot Take. I am at Mary Hegler, and Amy is at Amy Westervelt.
And like we said earlier, you should subscribe to our newsletter. We're doing great stuff over there. Everything from movie reviews to original reporting to climate grief essays and previews of essays that we're publishing elsewhere.
Exactly. Today, Amy went on a fantastic rant about the absence of leadership from California's legislators in Washington. That was just unparalleled. And, gotten a few jabs at editors who made her take climate change out of her wildfire stories from as recently as 2017.
Yes, isn't that crazy?
It's crazy, yeah. So, we're talking about a lot of stuff over there. We've got feelings, we've got thoughts. So definitely make sure that you subscribe.
Yep, and we've got a premium version with all of the features for as little as $7 a month. Or $80 a year, or if you really love us and you really want one of our amazing t-shirts, sign up as a founding member. That's $210 and worth every penny.
Right. But we understand if you can't do that right now, and we firmly believe that climate is a story of our time and it shouldn't live behind a paywall. So we produce a free newsletter too. It has a roundup of weekly coverage and a free feature from us and teasers for all the stuff in the premium newsletter. And just to talk about what we mean by this digest. So this idea kind of came out of my frustration and Amy's frustration with the lack of climate verticals on any of the major news sites. So if I wanted to see what Vox was saying about climate, I really had to dig into their masthead, and it's just a lot of work. Right. And then you have these aggregators like Apple News and Google News that their climate section is just really puny. And it was so if I wanted to take the plunge and really get into climate, I don't really know how to do it. And so for me, even as somebody who's plugged into this, I was having to keep up with climate stories through Twitter. And folks don't want to be on Twitter all the time. So if you want to keep up with the climate story, this is really what we created this for. Every single week we have a roundup, and it's long, of all the greatest climate stories of that week.
Yes, and I think the fact that we pull from lots of different outlets is a big bonus to this, because my issue also is that no one was aggregating it and curating it. So
exactly,
I had to go and do that, and now we're doing that for you.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, we've also got merchandise in our store now. We've got hats, mugs, all types of great stuff. You should definitely go and buy it and send us a picture of yourself wearing it.
That's right. We love to see that stuff. Okay, that's it for this episode. If you've got questions about the general theme of the episode or questions for Drew or us, send those to hottakes@criticalfrequency.org. That's hot takes, plural.
Yeah. And make sure to leave us a rating or review on iTunes. No joke, that really does help us find new listeners. I've seen more and more people sending them in, and thank you so much for that. If you haven't, just go ahead and do that. And if you have a negative review, we have a system for that. You can send it to brian.kahn@earther.com. That's Brian, BRIAN .KAHN@earther.com. He will read it.
We need to check in with Brian and see if he's gotten any hate mail on our behalf.
He has. He has, yeah.
All right, that's it. We'll talk to you soon.